Good morning. Happy Saturday. My name's Tara Jensen, and I'm coming to you live from Hamilton, Virginia. My in-laws, Craig and Jan, have generously lent us their kitchen this morning so we can talk about and bake step-by-step hot cross buns. So if you're new to doing a Zoom with me, my husband Marley is moderating and running the camera. So if you have a question, which is what I'm here for, please click the chat box at the bottom of the screen, and Marley will ask it out loud for you as we come to natural resting points. And if you haven't been here with me before too, one of our housekeeping rules is just put yourself on mute so we don't hear your background noise. And if you have to come in and out, you will receive a recording of this class sometime tomorrow afternoon for you to watch at your leisure. So I like to start off my bread baking classes, although we are making a bun today, with a quote from MFK Fisher from the wonderful book, How to Cook a Wolf. This quote means a lot to me. It relates to bread making, and I think it relates to these buns as well. So she says, "It does not cost much. It's pleasant, one of those almost hypnotic businesses like a dance from some ancient ceremony. It leaves you filled with peace and the house filled with one of the world's sweetest smells. But it takes a lot of time. If you can find that, the rest is easy. And if you cannot rightly find it, make it. For probably there is no chiropractic treatment, no yoga exercise, no hour of meditation in a music-throbbing chapel that will leave you emptier of bad thoughts than the homely ceremony of making bread." So I would add to that the ceremony of making buns, and the hot cross bun is definitely a ceremonial bread. So I didn't grow up eating hot cross buns. They're actually new to me this year, but I've seen a lot of my friends in the UK, in Australia, in New Zealand make them around Easter every year. So I am jumping on the bandwagon, and they are delicious, and they're so much better made at home than anything that you're going to find in the supermarket. So this is the bun. We bake it to a nice dark brown mahogany color, and the thing that makes a hot cross bun a bun, it's a couple things, three things I would say. It's an enriched dough, so it includes this dough. I use honey, but it would include sugar, eggs, butter, and milk. So a lean dough would just be flour, water, salt, sourdough, or yeast. So enriched, so lots of dairy. Eggs are very bountiful this time of year, so it makes sense. Also, it usually has a currant or a raisin in the dough, and will typically have a warm spice like a cinnamon. These rolls that we're making today, buns, have cinnamon, nutmeg, and cardamom in them, so they're very warm. And of course, a X on the top. So I'll get to all the decor at the end of the class. If you are mixing your dough with me, you want to have everything ready, your mixer out, have sort of mise en place ready to go. And this is just a plug for folks that bake at home. I encourage you to do what we would do in a professional setting called your weigh out. So don't wait until the morning that you're going to mix your dough to get all your things ready and scaled out. You will use a digital scale for this. We'll go over the tools, the ingredients, and then we'll get to baking. But it'll just help you have a nice, relaxed morning if all your ingredients are prepped. So the dough, excuse me, the raisins and currants are soaked. So we've got those ready. What was I talking about?
Way out.
Oh, right. So you want to do your weigh out. And
if people are baking at home with you.
Okay. Oh, right. If you're baking at home with me, have everything hopefully is ready for you. We're going to mix that dough together. And if you've already got your buns shaped and in the pan, you want to have your oven on at 350 so we can bake together. And I'm standing in front of the oven, so it's quite warm in here. And if you want to do your folding with me, you'll need to have your dough ready. And if you're not doing any of those things, you're just having your coffee and tea, relaxing and watching, that's great too. Okay. So you don't need much to make this bun. It's rather simple. The most crucial thing is a digital scale. So you probably noticed in your recipe, everything is in grams. Grams are the most accurate unit of measurement for bread baking. So this is the scale that I use at home and in all my in-person classes. It's called My Way. Nobody's paying me to say that. But I do prefer that the platform is risen up off the table and it's not glass, just my preference. But I've had this one for about 6 years. So they are a workhorse, even if you use them every day. So digital scale, very important. And then if you want to take the temperature of your dough, you want to have a digital thermometer on hand. So wheat-based breads, which this is, like to ferment at a temperature zone between 75 and 78 degrees Fahrenheit. So when your dough comes off the mixer, you can pop your digital thermometer in there, make sure it's in that zone. If it's cold, put it in a warm spot, like on top of the dryer, on top of the fridge. If it's too warm, you want to stick it somewhere chilly. Maybe you've got a mudroom or a garage or a basement. Generally don't put it in the fridge. But a digital thermometer when you're working with sourdough will really help you understand kind of where your dough's at when it comes out of the mixing bowl. Also, when you're baking your buns, they're done at an internal temperature of 190 degrees. So if you're unsure if your buns are done, you can pop the thermometer in there, and 190 is good. And that's true for all wheat-based breads as well. I like to use 2 different kinds of scrapers. I call this a dough scraper because it's flexible. You can get these at the hardware store too, like in the paint aisle. Sometimes they'll sell them and they're pretty inexpensive. This is what I call the bench knife. This is more what we'll do. We'll use when we're chopping the dough and scaling it out. So these are helpful. Handy microplane, zest of a lemon and orange is included in this recipe, as is fresh nutmeg, which if you can find is wonderful in this dough. So microplane, a whisk, I'm sure you all have those on hand, and a nice brush for coating the buns with egg wash, and then later on orange simple syrup. Pretty much everybody has a 9x13 pan. That's the right size pan to make a dozen of these buns. And so we've got one here and a nice mixing bowl. I like one that has high sides. I don't prefer a wide one, just so I can get kind of messy around the edges. And when you're making the frosting for this as well, if you're making it in a bowl with tall sides, it's really helpful. And I think that's it. You do want a mixer for this because this is an enriched dough. I don't recommend mixing it by hand. And I do encourage you to use the paddle attachment rather than the dough hook. If you've taken some of my other sourdough enriched bread classes this winter, you know that the sourdough has yeast and bacteria in the mixture of flour and water, and we're using the sourdough for the purpose of the culturing element of the lactobacilli, and there's about 100 parts lactobacilli to 1 part yeast in a traditional like white flour liquid style sourdough starter, which is what I'm using today, equal parts flour and water. And we think that all the rising that happens in our dough comes just from this very tiny amount of yeast. But actually, when you use the paddle attachment and you mix the dough for several minutes, you're whipping air into the batter. And so that's already creating giant pockets of air. Then the yeast is, yes, off-putting gas, and it's going to travel. Basically, think of the dough as a batter. It's going to travel through the batter, hit those air pockets, and enlarge in what's already there. So I prefer, with actually most of my sourdough breads, to use the paddle attachment to build in air into the dough rather than the dough hook. You can mix this by hand, and if you are, that's awesome. You just want to make sure when you're incorporating the butter, you want to use your hands like this squeezing motion, and you want to really work the dough until you don't see any streaks of yellow or butter inside. Okay, so I think we can get to the step-by-step. Again, if you're just joining, welcome. And if you have any questions for me, that's what I'm here for. You can type them into the chat box at the bottom of the screen. Do we have any questions so far? No? Okay, great. So I have rolls that were mixed. You've got two different options for this dough. It's very flexible. So I always joke that, you know, the recipe is just a suggestion. I do encourage you to make it as the recipe calls for one time, so you kind of understand your control and then branch out. But this dough is designed to be mixed in the morning, folded over the series of a couple of hours, and then it really is going to stay out. It's got a bulk fermentation, so that first rise of the dough is 8 hours long. There's a lot of heavy ingredients in here. We're doing a big ask of the sourdough to lift this bun dough. So it's an 8-hour first rise or bulk fermentation. We've got a series of 3 folds, which I'll demo for you. Then you'll shape the dough, put it in the pan, and then leave the buns to rise or proof overnight and bake the following morning. And that works really well for us in this kitchen. It's springtime, it's cold and warm at all the right moments of the day, but you can pop this dough in the fridge if you need to. So you can mix it in the morning, go through the series of 3 folds, go through that whole 8 hours of bulk fermentation, then pop the dough in the fridge covered to chill overnight, take it out the next morning and shape it. And it can stay in the fridge for, I'd say, up to 24 hours. After 24 hours, there's going to be so much acidity built up in the dough, it'll start to eat away at itself and it'll collapse. But, you know, we have a toddler, we've got life going on, we understand chaos. So the fridge is a great place to pop your dough if something comes up. So you can shape it the following morning, proof, and then you'll be baking the buns, you know, somewhere in the evening, should you want to have these, you know, in the late afternoon with some tea. So we have here, kind of going a little bit backwards because the oven is hot behind me. I want to get these buns in there. So before we mix, we'll get into preparing your buns for the oven. So these look great to me. These buns are at 125 grams each, or maybe around 130. And they have fully risen. The way to tell that they're properly proofed, you're gonna do something called the poke test. So just take your finger and you're just gonna jab the dough. And if it bounces right back at you, it's probably still too tight from shaping. There's still a lot of tension in there. So you want to give the dough more time. If you pop your finger in there and it leaves the indent like any belly button and then slowly rises back to meet you, you're in the zone where you can bake your dough, or if you needed to retard it fully proofed, you could do that as well, meaning pop it in your fridge. If you press in on the dough and you hear a little bit of gas coming out, it's probably overproofed. I always say finish what you start, so go ahead and bake it. It's an amazing thing about baking. There's so much failure and there's moments of success. So I really encourage you, if you're making these for the first time or anything for the first time, go easy on yourself, and takes, you know, maybe 3 or 4 times of making the same recipe over and over to really get a muscle memory and sort of some knowledge in your body about what's going to happen with the dough. So I just did the little poke test with these, same that I do on my sourdough bread. So we've got a little pop, so I know it still has some energy to rise in the oven, but I can also feel as I gently press them that they are totally full of air and they've risen about 50% or all the way up to the top of the pan. So feeling really great about these. If you're curious, I proof my doughs overnight on top of the fridge here. It's a very warm space, and of course the fridge is going to emit just a little bit of heat. So baking at home is all about finding the temperature zones in your house that you need at certain times. So maybe the top of your fridge will deliver you beautiful buns as well. This is the egg wash. It is equal parts heavy cream and egg yolk. If you can find a nice organic heavy cream, that's of course the best. And fresh eggs. We're very lucky to have a neighbor that's bringing us beautiful eggs from some heritage birds that I'm dying over. So we have gorgeous orange yolks in here, but you want it to be this very nice, sunny, bright yellow color, nothing too pale. We want a bold bake on these buns. I always say that's where the flavor is, in the color. So we're not going for golden, we're going for mahogany, and the egg wash is going to help us do that. So you'll notice if you're reading along in the recipe or if you read it prior, that I call for 2 coats of egg wash. And if we've talked about brioche together before, you know I call for 3 coats of egg wash. So this is what my friend Ashley Kapp, she's a pastry chef in Asheville, North Carolina. She calls it the lacquer, or we've joked that it's like nail polish for your dough. Because if you want that intense bakery style shine, folks in a professional setting might be egg washing their dough several times. So a nice thick coat, we're gonna pop the buns in the oven at 350 for 20 minutes, take them out and then egg wash them again, and we'll get even more color. If it were a brioche loaf, I would egg wash it once before it goes in the oven and then twice while it's baking. That's how you bring out those nice burnt reds. The fruit in the dough, just as I'm looking at this, I didn't want to use up all my very special candied orange peel. So you should have gotten, along with the recipe for these buns, the recipe for my candied orange peel and citrus olive oil cake, which was like all I was making during January, so many of those olive oil cakes. But I really fell in love with the process of candying orange peel this winter, and I can't wait till next year where I can do it again. I did omit the candied orange peel in these particular buns because it is so precious to me. Those of you who made it, you know it's time consuming. And they have risen quite well. So if you want to play around with the fruit soaker called for in these buns, feel free. We've got today chopped apricots, chopped cherries, and currants, and we are going to do the candied orange peel, but that's a thing you can play around with, the fruit combination in the dough if you've got something you love. Okay, so nice, even, thick coat of egg wash. Boom, okay. And then they're gonna go in. And Marley, can you set a timer for 20 minutes? Okay, so the buns are in and now we can get to mixing. Before I pull out the mixer, does anybody have any questions so far?
I haven't seen any.
Okay, great. Okay, so in the bowl of the mixer, so this is what I'm talking about, your way out, you can do this the night before and then you're just like drinking your coffee and having a great time. So in the bowl, I have 300 grams of bread flour. I'm using King Arthur organic bread flour. It's pretty ubiquitous at most grocery stores around the States. If that's not available to you, I know we have some international folks watching, so hello, thank you. You just want a strong flour, something like above 12%. So something that you would use to do pizza, bagels, or bread with is what you're looking for. So 300 grams of that. We've got 150 grams of whole wheat flour. We are using Carolina ground whole wheat flour. They are a stone mill outside of Asheville, North Carolina. Wonderful folks there. So freshly milled stone ground flour. And if you're using freshly milled stone ground flour, you might want to adjust the hydration. All that beautiful bran inside the flour is very thirsty, we say, so it's going to soak up a lot of moisture. So use the amount of liquid that the recipe calls for, and then you can drizzle in a little bit. You'll see as I do it to get to the right consistency. Question?
Yeah, so what's the oven temperature that you just put it in?
My oven temperature is at 350. Feels like a lot warmer. Somehow are these classes, I'm always like standing right in front of the oven. I guess it's my happy place.
And then would the citrus peel work well with other citrus fruits, such as grapefruit and citron mixed with the orange peel?
Absolutely. So my husband and I are in the long process of excited to build the house, but living out of a suitcase, and I was with my folks for a couple months during all of this. I know some of you saw the classes there, and Florida, right? Citrus season. So my mom and I went nuts. We did lime. I was actually my favorite citrus peel to candy. We did grapefruits. We did several different kinds of oranges. And like, I was even saving like the little clementines that my toddler loves to eat, those little oranges. So we candied like any peel you could think of. And the hardest part is just waiting. So it does take a long time, but it's not a lot of hands-on time. So if you're curious about it, we're right at the end of citrus season here, so go for it. But lime was my favorite. Okay. So also, along with the 3 different kinds of flour, last flour was all-purpose. So we are using a King Arthur all-purpose flour that's around 11% protein, also organic. And we've got the spices in here as well. So cinnamon, cardamom, and nutmeg. I'm blending all 3. Traditionally, just cinnamon would be used in these buns. And then we've got the zest of both an orange and a lemon. You could get away with the zest of just an orange would be more traditional, but we're using both. And so I weigh everything out. I put this bowl from my mixer on top of the digital scale. You can add each ingredient, and you're gonna tear it and add the next. So this was all weighed out in the bowl, and then I just turned the mixer on for a few minutes to incorporate those dry ingredients. And then we're going to make basically I call it a slurry. It's gonna have your 3 eggs. So the recipe calls for 150 grams of eggs. That's about 3. You don't have to go too nuts, scooping egg yolk or egg whites in and out of your bowl on the digital scale. 3 is probably gonna be fine. This dough can take a little extra moisture because it's got that whole grain flour. But just, if I have to remove something, I generally remove a little bit of the white rather than the yolk. So we'll make a slurry with the 3 eggs. I think it's 100 or 125 grams of the sourdough starter, and the milk. Then we've got the soaker ready, the candied orange peel ready, and the butter ready. So the process for mixing, dry ingredients in the bowl, you're gonna make a slurry with the wet ingredients, incorporate those 2 things, and then you wanna mix it on a medium to high speed for 3 full minutes. I'm not gonna go 3 minutes here with you. We're gonna kind of speed it up so you don't have to just listen to the sound of the mixer. But it will climb the paddle. You just wanna turn it off, use your hands, just pull it off the paddle. The dough's very stiff to begin with, and then as you add like the fruit soaker, it's gonna add some more moisture, and then of course the butter, it becomes really luscious by the end. So don't be nervous if it seems too firm at first. Couple of things you want to have prepped before you even turn this on. You want to have your butter. We're using Flugra today. This is just my favorite, like grocery store European butter. So it's got a high fat content, around 82%. And this is what I use in my pie crust, cookies, everything. I'm kind of just Flugra girl. No one's paying me to say that. But I also really I've started to find Vermont Creamery butter in the grocery stores, and I used to live near there in Vermont. It's beautiful butter. It's a little bit more expensive. So if you feel like Flugra is expensive, maybe you're not ready for the Vermont Creamery, but both are really great and both have the same amount of butter fat, which is what you're looking for. So mine is already weighed out, it's a stick, and it's cubed up, ready to go. And then the fruit soaker, which I'll try and show you without spilling it all everywhere. Raisin juice is actually very sticky, so just letting you PSA here. So last night I chopped up the apricots, chopped up the cherries, and the currants. These are all dried fruit. And if you don't soak dried fruit and you put it into your bread dough, it's going to compete with the proteins in that bread flour for the water. And so you want to soak the fruit, so it's going to plump up and not wick away the moisture from your bread dough, and then sort of inhibit the gluten formation. So this was soaked. Part of the problem with soaking fruit though is that then you might get too much water in your bread dough and you get something really sticky and sloppy. So I put a strainer in the sink, turn out the fruit soaker, and then just press it into the strainer and let that extra water run off, and then just kind of do that maybe an hour ahead of mixing the dough, so kind of air out, and then weigh out what I need, and we're good to go. So this is all prepared and dried. And of course, how could I forget? You want to have your beautiful sourdough starter ready. So I'll try and point this towards the camera without pouring it on the floor, if you saw our bloopers reel last week. But my sourdough starter is equal parts flour and water. So this is a King Arthur bread flour. And as you can see, it's very classic style, creamy, yogurt flavored, kind of milky, thick, like a really thick pancake batter. I feed my starter in the evening around 9 o'clock. That's as late as I can stay up right now. And I discard most of what's in the container, leave about 20%, and then feed it equal parts. Both time it's King Arthur bread flour and just some warm water from the tap. Stir it up really thoroughly so you don't see any dry patches of flour. Pop a cover on it and let it ferment at room temperature. So that's like 68 to 72 degrees Fahrenheit for between 8 and 12 hours, and you should be ready to go. If you're really curious, if you're new to baking with sourdough and you're not sure if it's going to be ready or not, you can do something called the float test. So you need a glass of water. So just do it real quick. You need a glass of water. You're gonna dip your fingers in some water. You're gonna pull the sourdough starter out of the container, and voila. If it floats on the top of the jar like that, it's just an indication that it's filled with gas, and that's what you're looking for. The fact that it's filled with gas is telling us that the wild yeast is happy and active, producing a lot of gas in the batter, and it's ready to go on to leaven your bread dough. So float test, if some of you use the tartine style bread making, you'll be very familiar with it. If it's new to you, I encourage you to give it a shot, testing your starter. And the other thing I wanted to mention, the number one question I get about sourdough starter is, should my lid be on very tight or very loose? And I just wanted to address that. It depends on the container that your sourdough starter is in. So I prefer using kind of an oversized flexible container. I love those deli containers that you get from like soup takeout. This is a delicious looking maple cotton candy container. I wish I had some of those, but this morning I came down here and it was like, ballooned out, and the container will actually just burp itself if there is gas being produced in here overnight. So I prefer something that's flexible. I don't love plastics, but for this application, I find it to be really useful. If you use a glass jar, so lid on tight for things that are flexible. If it's something that's glass, you actually want to leave a little bit of room for the gas to pass out of the container. I haven't seen this happen, but it could crack. And of course you wouldn't want that. You just have to toss your starter. So glass container, something really rigid, put the lid on and then give it a little quarter turn. And okay, that's it. So dry ingredients ready to go. Then I've got here we can switch to the overhead. Does anybody have any questions at the moment?
There's one.
Just hide everything on myself. Okay. All right.
Here's a question. Moved and my starter looks different. It almost looks like a film on top. It smells good, but not the same look. I've had the starter for 10 years being successful.
Yeah, what's the color of the film? I'm sure if you've had your starter for 10 years, you know that often in refrigeration, the yeast is going to produce alcohol and gas. The bacteria is going to produce acids and a lot of flavor, very little gas. So if it's in the fridge for too long without being fed, it will develop what we call the hooch on the top, and it's just the alcohol separating out of the batter, and it just rests on the top. It doesn't mean that your starter is dead. Is it is it watery or is it like a fuzzy film? You
No,
don't know? Okay.
it's not the hooch thing. I've had that before and I know that's fine. It's almost like it's dried out on the top, like air has gotten to it and it's maybe just a little bit off color, but I just started I feed it like every week for sure if I don't bake. And
Have you tried switching the container?
yeah, I do it all the time. I switch it when I feed it. I use the new container. I always use
And
glass.
you're putting it in the fridge and it's kind of drying out on top?
Yeah. And I'll feed it a couple of days to get it, really perky. And then I put it in the fridge. And then every week when I take it out, it just doesn't look like it used to. And
Sure. I mean, we don't here. Would you mind switching to the, we'll switch up so my elbow isn't talking to you, but okay. Place is a huge factor in all of our baking, right? Our environment where we are. So I would give your starter some time. It's probably just acclimating. If you have a new fridge and there's a different level of humidity in your fridge, or it's a little colder, those are some small things that can have a big impact on your starter. Maybe try leaving it out on the countertop and, refreshing it once or twice a day till you don't see that. And then if you put it in your fridge, then we know it's something about the environment in the fridge. But it could also, internally be going through like some, changes of the microbiome of what's in your starter. If you've had it for 10 years, it's probably a pretty robust culture. So it's not like it's just going to faint or react badly at the sign of some new bacteria. But, different fridge, different environment. I think it'll just take some time for us to settle. But please email me. I love to keep these conversations going. And if anybody has a guess or we want to kind of group think around what could be happening, please type your suggestions or comments into the chat box and we'll kind of see if we can piece through this together with you.
okay.
Sound good?
Sound good.
Great. We're not even close to 20 minutes on the buns, are we?
It's 15.
Okay, all right, they smell good, they smell good. Okay, so dry ingredients, I mixed the slurry together, so we're gonna pour this in and then I'll adjust the hydration if I need to. So this is way more than I need. I encourage you to keep just like, a couple tablespoons, so you're not prone to pouring it all in at the sign of panic of a dry dough. I've got a little milk waiting to hydrate extra if I need to. And then we'll do the fruit, candied peel, and then we'll do the butter. So thank you, Marley. Now we can switch up to the overhead. Okay, great. And then blown up, yeah, okay. All right. Oh, maybe plugging it in would help. You want a flexible spatula to get everything in there. Okay, so I'm gonna stop and evaluate. There is a lot of dry flour on the bottom of the bowl, so I'm gonna add some more, but it's gonna look like a shaggy, gluey mess, and that's totally normal. I forgot to mention when I was going down the ingredients for the slurry that the honey is also in there. So we've got, that's what we're using for the sweetener. So I'm gonna drizzle in the milk. Just to get the dry flour on the bottom. And then we're gonna pick up the speed for a minute. And then we're gonna pick up the speed for a second. Okay, so I believe in your recipe, it calls for, you're mixing it on medium to high speed for a full 3 minutes. That's gonna develop the gluten, which is what we want, but I'm not going to make you under 3 minutes of that. So we're speeding it up here. If you have to cut time out of your mix, I would do it at this moment, but I would not. Sounds dramatic, but we can go back. Okay. I would not, under any circumstance, just add all of these ingredients at once and mix it. I did that. It did not make a nice bun, so I'm saving you that journey. And you at least want to get the dough together, then you can add everything else without giving it that 3 minutes, like we're about to do. So soaker going in. If you're interested in adding any kind of nuts to this dough, like you want to go really rogue, you're gonna toast your nuts before you put them in the dough. It does a sizzler action. They won't soak up as much moisture, and just a nicer flavor. I could imagine adding pine nuts to this, so I'm just putting it out there. This is the candied citrus, and I wanted to mention, it says chop it. I actually had great success just cutting it with scissors. So we keep the candied peel in the freezer. My hand got really cold, but it was way better to chop it with scissors than it was to cut it with a knife. 20 minutes, okay. So we're gonna add this and then take a look at our buns. So it's been 20 minutes and they're gonna come into the oven. We're gonna do another coat of this sunny egg wash. Okay, great. So we are halfway through the bake. They look good, they smell good. And I am primarily a bread baker or trained in bread baking. Been baking almost every day for 20 years, which feels crazy to say at this point, but I am so in love with buns this year because it is a nice size piece of bread to give somebody. A lot of my life has been spent trying to gift people large loaves of bread, and these buns are perfect gifts, especially as we get into Easter week, holiday season, holiday table. It's nice to bring a bun. Loaves of bread are good too, but it's a good gift size. So you've already got one coat of egg wash on here. You don't have to be too particular with this second coat. And then they're going to go back in for another about 30 minutes. I keep egg wash on hand in my kitchen regularly in case I'm inspired to bake. These are like the small things that just make it easy. So it'll last for about a week in the fridge. So this is something you could prep way ahead of time. Final coat of egg wash back in. Can we get a timer for 30 minutes? did a lot of baking with my mom this winter. I already mentioned that, and I didn't realize I had a teacher voice until she was like, we were making a pie together, and she was like, stop talking to me with that voice. So got my teacher voice on for you guys this morning. Okay. Ready to go with the dried fruits and candied citrus in the bowl. We can go overhead for this. Sure. Okay. So it gets kind of sloshy and it'll get kind of stringy, and then it will pull back together. So don't worry. And then as you add the butter, it's all really going to come together. So yeah, looks good. And you'll notice as soon as you add the soaker that a lot more moisture introduced to the dough. And then the last thing we're going to do is add the butter a tablespoon at a time. You want to add a bit and then wait until you don't see it anymore, and then keep adding it. And I've used a lot of different mixers being out of my home kitchen this winter. If your mixer can take it, then you do want to start after the butter's incorporated. You want to turn it up to a nice high speed because that's how you're going to get the air in there. So we'll see. But it's about medium to get going. Let's see the side dial. Right, looks great. Great, we got a question?
In that mixer, have you ever doubled the dough?
Yes, and in this particular mixer, which is, it's the Professional 600 Scrapes, my father-in-law's, and I did a 4-batch in here, which kind of came out of the bowl a little bit more than I wanted it to, but it was possible. So with this size bowl, you can definitely do 2. For sure, 3 easy, 4 kind of hard. Okay. So put this behind this. Thank you, mixer. All right, so kind of try and bring it, but this is what it looks like when it's done. I know the skylight is right on it, but it's gonna look gluey and shaggy. And then over time, so the mix is now done. And now once we transfer it into its container, it's going to be going through what we call bulk fermentation or the first rise. And you're going to give it a series of 3 folds spaced 60 minutes apart. And I've got a dough waiting, ready to be folded. So we'll go through that process. It's a great time for more questions. If folks have questions. Okay, wonderful. So you want to have a bowl waiting. And a little bit of light cooking oil in there. And this is where your flexible dough scraper is just going to be your best friend, because you can just firmly, right, use a little elbow grease to get in there and lift the dough out. Smells so good. And you're really, I mean, you can pre-clean your bowl basically with these. I don't have it right now, but generally when I'm baking at home, I also like to keep like a restaurant style pitcher of water in my work area. Then you can be dunking your hands in it and dunking your tools in it. And you don't have to gum up your kitchen sink with all this bread dough. But this is a rather sticky dough with the addition of all the honey and the eggs. So expect a little mess. So shaggy, completely thoroughly studded with candied peel and fruit, looks good. And now I'll show you, just resting it for an hour will start to make it look even more like a dough. So I'll cover this and then we'll do a fold. Great. So here is the dough after it's been rested for an hour. This is a little bit longer. Something you can do on the dough to kind of test the strength is called pulling a window. So I'll try and do that for you here. Maybe we can just go to the straight ahead camera. Also want to show you, I like to buy my flour in bulk, especially if you're getting it from a place like Carolina Grounds. You're probably going to get more than 5 pounds at a time just because of the cost. So I keep my flour, you know, I label it. Sometimes I put the date on it, but I always transfer it out of the paper bags into one of these Cambros. So much easier to just quickly scoop out of. You're not like wrestling with the top of a bag. And so they're also great for proofing or storing dough in during the winter. So these Cambros here, just wanted to plug, like I love these containers. So to pull a window, I'm just going to dust a little bit of flour on the top of the dough. You want some on your fingers, and then you're going to take a little portion in your hand, and I said it's like making pizza for an elf, but you're just going to stretch the outside. And essentially what you're doing here is checking for the strength of the dough. So hopefully using the mixer and using a strong bread flour is going to give us a nice strong dough. And if you hold it up, it's starting to fall apart, that's normal. But we've got all the heavy things on it. If you hold it up to the light in the window, you can start to see like a pane come through. So this is shredding a little bit. We've got, it's hard for the gluten network to form in this dough. So gluten inside your bread dough, 2 proteins, gliadin and glutenine. Gliadin is responsible for the extensibility in a bread dough, and glutenine is responsible for the elasticity. So those are 2 characteristics we're looking for in any kind of bread dough, you know, sourdough loaf or a bun. And water interacts with these proteins and create long chains inside the bread dough. And so as you knead it or fold it, or use a mechanical mixer, you're essentially taking those long strands, kind of felting them together to make a very strong network inside the bread dough that's going to trap the gas. So we are using a strong flour here, and now we're going to do something called a fold, which is going to introduce even more strength into your dough. So it's tearing, so I know it needs to be folded. And this is just a note in regards to sourdough breads in general. If you're a sourdough bread maker, you can pull a window on any of your doughs after that hour-long rest to kind of help you gauge the strength of your dough. So in the recipe for kneading, you can knead it or you can fold it, whichever is most comfortable for you. I'm going to show you something called a slap and fold, which we're going to do on the table here. And you're essentially using the table and then your body weight to pull and stretch the dough several times, like making a little coil. So you want a little bit of water on your table, not a lot. You don't want to add extra water to the dough through this. So just a thin surface, and then maybe we'll go to the overhead. And then as you can, there's a little bit of moisture on my hand. You want to pull out all the dough from the bowl at once. So I don't know if I finished my train of thought there, but if your dough is ever shredding apart on you, one, could be an issue actually with the flour, but two, if there's something you want to do to help it along, you can increase the amount of folds that you're giving it. So rather than 3, you can do 4 or 5. So I need a little bit of water on my other hand. So I'm looking down at the dough, kind of get it into a bit of a rectangle. And I'm going to take the bottom part closest to me and fold it over to the top. So the first thing is just enclosing. So this will be the outside, this will be the inside. Okay, one flip. Now I'm going to take from the right hand side. If you imagine a line running down the middle, the left hand side of the dough is going to slap to the table, stick, and then I'm going to fold it over, and it'll just become clear as we go. And your first fold is going to feel like what if you haven't done it before, and it's normal for it to kind of fall apart. But by your third fold, you should be seeing a nice tight surface, kind of like the surface of a balloon. The dough should feel strong when you pull a window. It shouldn't tear. But this is really just organizing everything after the mix. And if this is uncomfortable for you, of course, you can always use a little bit of flour and fold the dough on the table. But we are using the tension between the table and our hands to just stretch that gluten and, fling some dough everywhere in the kitchen. That's the fun part. Okay. Then you're going to use your bench scraper to scoop it all up and transfer it back into the bowl. I love teaching in-person classes, and we'll get back to that at some point. Actually, we'll be doing an in-person pie class here in Northern Virginia next month. Folks want to come make pie. But I always appreciated if someone was new to folding bread dough, if they went out with some gusto. We've had like bread dough on the ceiling, bread dough on the wall. But all of these things, it's better to have some confidence and enthusiasm in your motions rather than the other way. Okay, so there's the fold. Gonna cover it. You can use one of these camber lids. I think that's what I was trying to get at when I was showing off the camber roast. You can use one of these lids, is great, or you can just use a nice hand top. So series of 3 folds. Okay, we can go back. Thank you. Over the first 4 or 5 hours, and then you're free. You can pop a lid or make sure the dough is nicely covered. One thing I actually really like to use on top of my bowls and my bread, as it's proofing, wouldn't work for the 9x13 pan, but it's a shower cap. So they sell them on like Breadtopia as bread covers. They're a little expensive, but actually just like at the supermarket, you can find like shower caps for $1, and I just reuse them as I need to. And rather than wash them, I'll tend to just let them dry out, and you can crack any dough off of it and keep going, and then you've got a nice barrier so your dough doesn't dry out. Okay, I think we are ready to talk about shaping. Do we have any questions about folding? Seems good. Okay. So for shaping your bread dough, essentially the same shaping a dinner roll. I feel like these are like somewhere between a fruitcake and a dinner roll anyways. And this dough looks beautiful, very happy with it. So I mixed this yesterday morning, and then last night at around 8:30, 9 o'clock, I divided the dough into 2 batches. One batch got shaped and it's what's in the oven right now. The other batch got a lid on it and it just chilled in the fridge last night. So I'll show you how to shape today. So again, using the refrigerator to start and stop the process is super helpful. So you want to flour your work surface. Turn the dough out. The dough is kind of sticky and shaggy in general, even with the folds. It's just the nature of the dough. And so I'm chilling it. If you have a hard time working with it and you're looking for some suggestions, chilling it is actually a great way to make it easier to handle for yourself.
Mimi says that dough is beautiful.
Thanks, Mimi. I'm like getting closer to the heat here, you guys. Oh yeah, these buns are looking great.
16 minutes.
Okay. So you can choose to just eyeball this dough into 12 portions. If you trust yourself or you're happy with some buns being bigger than other buns, that's your prerogative. I'm going to use a digital scale and I'm going to scale each one into 125 grams about. What I will do though is just go ahead and make kind of a grid on my dough beforehand. And the way that I was taught to divide dough in a bakery setting, you make a row and then I'm going to cut from this row, and then you want to use your first cut, kind of gauge the rest. So I'm going to guess about 125 grams. I really like to make like big croissants, big bread, big buns. So I've scaled this down to 125. I think when I started, they were like 150. It was just a little too big. My pizza dough is around like 250. That's definitely too big. So around 100, my friend makes them at 80 grams. So you can find what works for you, but it's a chunk about this big, if that's helpful. So I'm going to use that to gauge the rest. The middle of the dough is always going to give you a thicker cut. The ends, not so much. And you keep your dough on the scale and you can add to or take away from it as it's there. In one of my favorite baking jobs, like you were sort of at a high level of achievement when you could scale the ciabatta for everybody, because there was no shaping. So it went right from the scale, rolled in flour onto a flour couche on a board, and you were scaling for like 6 people. So it was always fun when you got to be scaling for the ciabatta. So I always think about those moments when I'm doing scaling at home. As you can see, like I'm trying to move quickly and you don't want to get too caught up on being exacting, like, which is silly because we're using grams and we're using a scale, but you could still be a little relaxed about it. 1, 2. Oh, looks like I cut a little bit too much dough out for our buns this morning. I eyeballed it. So we're gonna go with what's here, but we're a little short. Okay. How many more minutes on the?
So that's 20 minutes so far.
Okay, great. They smell done. They look done. So, I'm going to have your pan ready. So this is my first year really getting into hot cross buns. I prefer them with like a sweet frosting, so you'll see that in a minute. Traditionally, folks will use like a thin flour and water paste to glaze over it to make the cross, or I guess originally there was a short crust around the dough on the top to make an X. So I'm excited next year to try some of those things, but there's no sugar in the dough. So it's actually not super sweet, the dough itself, which I like. I'm not a fan of sugar in general. So it's sweetened with honey, and we'll get that kick of sugar just from the frosting. So I've got a little bit of flour off to the side, got my pan ready to go, and I've got all my chunks here. So some are great, like there's no excess on this piece of dough. Some it's like, 4 or 5 little portions of dough together. Doesn't matter, I'm going to shape them all the same way. So I'll dip the outside in a little bit of flour. So that's going to be the outside. Now we have the inside, so I just fold it over. And essentially you're making a little purse or pouch shape, just folding each end to kiss itself. This is also the way that I make pizza ball rounds. You're taking the dough, you're folding it to touch, 4/4 turn, folding it to touch. And then you get a little seam on the bottom and a cute round top. You can roll it in a little bit of flour and stick it in your pan. You can also roll it on the table, just like you would, make sure you can see the table, a dinner roll. So looking here, there's not a lot of flour in the work surface, some flour on the back, fold it over, same idea. I've got a seam running away from me, it's looking at you. And then I'm going to tuck that seam. My hand is going like this. I'm going to sort of coach it along the table here. The seam is on the bottom. I'm kind of cuddling it in the C shape of my hand and then rotating it. So I'm doing this motion. A little bit of it is pinched between the edge of my hand and the table. And then we get a nice dinner roll shape that way too. So dip it in the flour, floured side on the table, fold it over. So you've got a seam facing away from you. Put your hand in a C shape, cuddle that dough in your palm, and then you're sort of using a counterclockwise motion on the table to create a seam running along the bottom. And then I'll do one in the air as well. So again, dipping it in the flour, and then taking each side, stretching a little bit, bring it to kiss, stretch, kiss, and you've got a little pouch, a little roll that way. Roll on, roll. I'm going to go ahead and turn this off behind me. Great. I haven't tried this yet myself, but baking them in something like a cast iron skillet could be really fun, or a cake pan, like a circular container. And you can, of course, half the recipe to get 6, if that's what you need, rather than a dozen. And as I'm putting them into the pan, I do leave a little space between each row so that they can sort of proof out, have some room to grow. Sometimes when there's dough missing, we'll joke around and call it the angel share, like in winemaking and making in spirits of general, could be whiskey. Talk about the angel share. It's the amount that evaporates through the process of making the alcohol. So I find the same thing to be true when making bread. You know, we've got scales, we're doing all this math, and then, you know, sometimes you have a little bit more, a little bit extra, a little bit less. Right. Any questions? Okay.
Maybe one,
Okay, cool. So these are done behind me, and we're gonna pull them out of the oven and glaze them with some orange simple syrup. So if you did make the candied orange peel, one byproduct from that is the simple syrup. And it's, you know, it's even worth making a little bit of simple syrup. Doesn't even have to be flavored to go on these rolls to give them some gloss. It just takes it up a notch.
did you say
Mhm.
that you're keeping it between 75 and 78 overnight?
So I said room temperature for overnight, so not so particular. You know, once I go to bed and the dough's proofing, kind of let it take its own course. So 68 to 72 overnight for a proof. I prefer to proof at a slightly cooler temperature than I do to bulk ferment my dough at. You want it a little bit warmer when you're bulk fermenting because you're trying to get all that yeast and bacteria nice and active in your dough. And then during the proofing, we want to lengthen that time so you can build a lot of flavor, right? So that bacteria is going to culture the flour, transform it, and flavor it. So I prefer to proof at a slightly cooler temperature than I do for my bulk rice. 50 degrees is actually the ideal kind of proofing temperature for a lot of sourdough breads. My friend Jennifer, who used to work at Tartine, she told me at one point they just accidentally, like, the proofer or the fridge got hot overnight. Nobody checked on it. The bread was so good the next day. They actually just started setting it at 50 degrees to get a really nice rise. I have a friend who uses her wine cooler to set it at 50 degrees, and she proofs her bread in there. So if that's also helpful to you, there's some tidbits. So the buns look great. So mahogany color, that's what we're going for. There is a little bit of gold, but I can tell these are nice and shiny, super firm, look good. Everybody can see. Okay, good. Yeah, what do we got?
If you can't control your kitchen temperature, they live in an apartment building.
Sure.
Should we proof for less time?
Yeah, if you know in advance, like your building runs hot, then cut down on the proofing time, or do some proofing at room temperature, and you can finish your proofing in the fridge. So like, you know, I'll do that in the summer. If there's no way I can reduce my kitchen temperature and it's going to be 85 in the kitchen, 90 no matter what, then I'll do half of my proof at room temperature, and then half the rest of the proof in the fridge. Because you know, we really don't want to sacrifice the flavor that's building up. That's a big reason why we're using sourdough, and we deal with being sourdough people in general, keeping it going and alive. So I prefer to not shave off the time, but you know, you got to bake when it's ready. So if you go to do the poke test and you're checking out your buns or your bread dough, and it needs to go in after, and you know, to the oven after an hour or two of proofing because your room's so warm, that's just life. So, you know, go ahead and bake it right away. This is our orange simple syrup. And once the dough comes out, once the buns come out of the oven, they already are so shiny, but I'm just going to go ahead and brush them with the orange simple syrup. Another result of candying the orange peel is just a really simple marmalade. So Traditionally, these buns are eaten with a little bit of butter and marmalade. And so after when you candy the citrus peels, you're keeping the peels. The juice that's left over from the process is the simple syrup. But then you've got, the meat or the inside of all those fruits. So I chop them all up into walnut half-size pieces, whatever it was. I've done like oranges, grapefruits, and lemons all together. I've done just oranges. Put it in a container, cover the whole thing with salt, put it in your fridge for 24 hours. Salt's going to suck out all the moisture and also kind of simultaneously cook it a little bit. The next day, transfer all of that into like a big stock pot and get it boiling, then reduce it to a simmer and let it go for about an hour to 2 hours. And you end up with, to show it at the end, but you end up with this gorgeous marmalade by the time you're done. So then you can eat this on your buns as well. I do that with a lot of fruit for my pies in the summer. It's so hard to figure out kind of the right amount of eggs or buttercream, buttermilk in a pie dough, in a pie filling with wet fruits. Like we're about to do strawberries and rhubarb and everything. So macerating it in some sugar beforehand can help you control how the consistency of your pie filling. So we're getting into pie season, so I got pie on the brain. So nice, super shiny, we're good. And then I think we're coming into the frosting, the home stretch here. So if anybody has any questions, please feel free to ask. And then we're gonna decorate and eat, right? So if you're baking along with me at home, I hope your rolls are going well. And this is another place where prep is going to make it so easy. I love surface design, and that translates into my baking as well. And so I got a little excited. I made a couple different colors. Traditionally, just a white cross on top is what you're going to see. Definitely just at the supermarket. But since having a toddler, I've tried to loosen up. And so we've got like some pink and some yellow over here. And I thought this would be like such a fun party if you baked the rolls, had your frostings ready, and just had your friends over for some like Prosecco and bun decorating. Sounds like exactly what you should be doing this time of year. So here are my buns. And the frosting or the icing is made with mascarpone, butter, heavy cream, confectioner sugar, and almond extract. If you have almond paste on hand, you can use that. The frequency is just a little mellower than the almond extract. And so you do want to have, this is just like from the grocery store, a Wilson's cake decorating kit. So nothing too fancy. If you don't have any of this gear on hand, you can also just use like a Ziploc bag and use a pair of scissors to cut the tip off the end. You can make some beautiful designs with that, but make the frosting ahead of time if you want, so you can just enjoy decorating them. You're going to whip all of those ingredients together in a bowl to get a firm consistency. You might want to add a little bit more powdered sugar if the mixture is too runny. You might want to add a little bit more butter or mascarpone if the mixture is also too thin to spread to make a design. And if it's too firm, like it's very stiff, that you can drizzle in some heavy cream as you're working. So I always have to just adjust a little bit when I'm making my frostings. I've got a couple different decorative tips, but the most common thing you're going to see on a hot cross bun is just this wide circular tip. So I'll go ahead and just, you make an X on the top if they're in, you can frost them in the pan once they've cooled, and you could just do them all at once. I went with like this very bright yellow. And these have just been resting in the fridge overnight, so we can do it here today. And I like to roll down the top and put a little clamp, and then you're gonna squeeze it from the top here. And we're gonna get that X. Oh, wants to go out the top of the bag. Okay, one. Oh, yeah. Okay. Hot cross bun. They're really so pleasing. So I thought like we could do some other fun things. So these have some different attachments here. I'll just do flour on this one. My husband's birthday just happened. My daughter's birthday is next week. She was actually born on Easter. Easter is also personally just a very special holiday for me. And I think that these are just absolutely perfect for the holiday table, right? We're just getting into a lot of very important spring rituals. If you farm, if you eat food, you know, spring is a big time for farmers, getting out there, getting everything into the ground. And so celebrating this time of year is really important to me.
You got lots of excitement about your flower.
Okay, so this is just a different tip here. You can do individual flowers. And now, you know, you can't tell it's a hot cross bun from the top, but you'll know what's underneath. Okay, great. We've got some questions.
How long did you proof the shaped buns in the pan?
Great. Okay. Oh my God. Okay. I'm just going to come show you this. I'm really close. The buns went into the pan and they went on top of the fridge at 9 p.m. And then those were the buns that were baked during class today. So they went in the oven at 10:20, 10:30. So whatever amount of time that is, like 12-ish hours. So quite some time. Enriched sourdough breads can go for forever. So if you made lean sourdough breads, like no eggs, no milk, no butter, no sugar, and had them overproof, and you've got a little stage fright going into this dough, you can rest assured that these doughs can go for forever. Last week, I taught an Easter bread workshop. Easter breads are also really special to me. And we had buckets of this dough everywhere because we were showing different braids and different shapes. And I actually couldn't even fit them all in the fridge. So I left some just in our like breezeway between the house and outside, or mudroom, if you will, or your garage or your basement. And with no like actually going into the fridge, they were still gorgeous the next day. And in fact, like better than I imagined. So this dough can proof, it can bulk ferment for an incredibly long time. It can also proof for an incredibly long time. So yeah, try 12 hours. I think in the recipe it says about 8, just to make it, you know, reasonable. Sometimes if you tell people it's going to take 12 hours, that's just such an immediate turnoff that they're not going to try it. But as a parent, people, you know, people working, people have lives going on. That's a lot of hands-off time for a really delicious bread.
Do you leave the buns in the tray or on a rack to cool?
I'll leave the buns in the tray. Yep.
Mimi says she likes the colored icing and the various decorations. So pretty.
Thank you, Mimi.
And are you gonna cut one to see the inside?
Oh yeah, sure. So
Says EJ.
hey EJ, what's up? We've taken a lot of classes together, so little peace sign. Yeah, I've never done colors or sprinkles, but apparently having a toddler, I'm really just branching out here. So yes, I will cut one. We'll cut this plain one. Just a quick note, when I made all the different colors, I made one big batch. I just times the recipe by 4 and then had 4 different bowls out and just made a little bit of each one. So if you want to have like a holiday party with this. Beep. See if it's a little dark right here, but there's basically a little, see me trying to look at, there's some fruit or some candy peel in every bite. And they are a nice slab to just cover with butter and jam or marmalade too. So let's do a little bit more decor on this one, and then I think that's all for this morning, unless anybody has other questions. Coming up, I am going to do a pie class here on Zoom, so look forward to that next month if you want to up your pie game. I can't wait. I've started making a pie crust with egg yolk and buttermilk and whole grain flour. If you were paying attention last year, I sort of swore off pies and was just into the galette, but I'm back. And this pie dough is incredible. We've been making sweet pies, savory pies, and I can't wait to share it with you. We're also going to do, I mentioned this earlier, an in-person class. So if you'd like to check out my new neighborhood, you can come see me here next month and take an in-person pie class so we can walk through it all together. So here's another bun. But we've been talking a lot about just the holiday table and this time of year. And so this is a very secular bun here, but a holiday hot cross bun nonetheless. So.
Lynn and Jessica say thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Keep in touch. Send me an email if you have any problems while you're mixing your dough, shaping your dough, baking it. I'm here to help. So thanks for coming this morning, and thanks Marley for moderating and running the camera. And hopefully we'll see you here next month. Yay.
Bye.
Bye.